Have you ever been in a room where the tension is so thick you can almost cut it with a knife? Picture this, a room full of people all whispering in hushed tones, their eyes flickering nervously toward one woman. This woman isn't just any woman. She's the wife of a billionaire CEO, someone whose presence commands respect, fear, and admiration. She's the kind of woman who's always been in control, the center of attention, always at the top of the social ladder. Everyone is scared of her, or so they thought. But then something incredible happens. The room falls silent when a new face walks in. It's a black waitress. Someone with no ties to the high society, no big-name connections, but an aura that is just as commanding. She doesn't flinch when she meets the CEO's wife's icy gaze. In fact, she does the unthinkable. She makes the billionaire's wife look absolutely ridiculous. And as the scene unfolds, you won't believe the power shift that follows. Stay tuned, because what happens next will change everything. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the dramatic twist. Trust me, you'll want to hear this. Great. Moving on to the horror next sections of the script, we'll continue building on the emotional tension and dive deeper into the interaction between the billionaire CEO's wife and the horror black waitress. This section will continue to explore the shift in power dynamics, with some heartwarming and surprising moments. As the black waitress steps forward, you can feel the energy in the room shift. It's almost like the air got thicker, the very presence of this woman igniting a spark. She walks with grace, her eyes steady and confident, as though she's already familiar with this world of wealth and power. Yet, at the same time, completely untouched by it. The billionaire's wife, on the other hand, stands there, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the table. She's used to being the center of attention, her every word holding weight, her every move commanding respect. People step out of her way without question. But as the waitress approaches, there's a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. Something about this woman, her confidence, her strength, unsettles her in a way no one else ever has. The waitress stops right in front of the billionaire's wife, locking eyes. For a brief moment, it seems like the two women are in a silent standoff, and just when you think the tension will snap, the waitress does something unexpected. With a calm smile, she sets a tray down on the table, taking extra care with every movement. But it's her words that leave the room in stunned silence. "Sorry, I didn't realize I was interrupting your little kingdom." The billionaire's wife freezes, her jaw tightening. The room goes dead quiet. For the first time, there's no laughter, no whispers, just the uncomfortable sound of the wife's breathing. She hadn't expected this. Nobody had. The waitress's words hang in the air like a challenge, but there's something deeper in her tone. It's not just defiance. It's a quiet power that slowly begins to unravel the social fabric everyone else has spent years carefully constructing. You can see the billionaire's wife clenching her fists beneath the table, her face turning a subtle shade of red. Her eyes flicker to the other guests, desperate for them to join her in this familiar game of unspoken rules. But nobody moves. No one dares to speak. The silence is deafening. For the first time in years, the billionaire's wife feels vulnerable. She's always been able to control the room, to maintain her position at the top, but this woman, this waitress, is turning everything upside down. "What did you say?" the billionaire's wife manages, her voice faltering ever so slightly. The waitress doesn't flinch, her smile remains steady, almost too calm. "I said, I didn't realize I was interrupting your little kingdom," she repeats, her voice still light, but there's a knowing glint in her eyes. It's clear now that the waitress isn't intimidated. In fact, she seems to be enjoying the discomfort she's causing. The room can feel the tension escalating, and yet there's a strange sense of satisfaction. People start to shift in their seats, eyes darting nervously between the two women. You can see the billionaire's wife trying to regain her composure, her mind working overtime to figure out how to salvage her image. But the waitress isn't finished. As if this moment of discomfort weren't enough, she takes another step forward. "I didn't mean to intrude," she says, her voice now softer, almost apologetic. The room breathes a collective sigh of relief, but I do have a job to do, and frankly, it's more important than whatever little game you're playing here." The billionaire's wife's face pales, and for a second there's something in her eyes. It's not anger or frustration anymore. It's fear. Fear of someone who doesn't know their place, someone who doesn't bow to the social norms she's so accustomed to. Fear of losing control. The waitress doesn't wait for a response. She moves away, calmly heading back to the kitchen. As she walks, the tension in the room begins to lift. But it's not gone entirely. Instead, something has shifted. The other guests, who had been quiet and submissive, seem to hold their breath, waiting for the billionaire's wife to make her next move. But she doesn't. She just sits there staring at the now empty space where the waitress once stood, trying to figure out how to react. The power that was once firmly in her hands is now slipping away piece by piece. The billionaire's wife sits there, her face a mask of confusion and anger, her mind racing. She's always been so sure of herself, so sure of her place in the world. Yet in just a few minutes, this woman, this waitress, has shattered that confidence with a single conversation. And now the room feels different. There's an unspoken understanding that something has changed, that the rules of this place no longer apply. The guests who were once so eager to please, so quick to laugh along with the billionaire's wife's jokes, are now looking at her with a quiet skepticism. The power has shifted, and it's subtle, but it's undeniable. The eyes that once looked at the billionaire's wife with admiration now flicker toward the waitress, their gaze filled with curiosity, maybe even respect. The billionaire's wife doesn't miss this shift. She can see it in their eyes. And though she's never been one to show vulnerability, she can't help but feel the sting of it now. The confidence that once radiated from her every step is slowly being replaced by doubt. And it's not just doubt about the waitress. It's doubt about her entire life, her entire identity. Is this what it's like to have everything, only to have it all come crashing down because of a single moment? The black waitress, completely unaware of the storm she's created, steps back into the room with a tray of drinks. Her movements are calm, steady, as though she's been in situations like this before. She's not fazed by the tension in the air. She simply goes about her work, her smile a quiet reflection of someone who knows her worth, someone who's never needed to bow to anyone's expectations. As she places the drinks on the table, her eyes meet the billionaire's wife's for just a second. This time there's no challenge in her gaze, just a quiet understanding. She knows exactly what she's done, but she also knows that she doesn't need anyone's approval to stand tall. And that's when it hits. The billionaire's wife. It's not the waitress's words or her defiance that have cut the deepest. It's the fact that she hasn't apologized, hasn't backed down. For the first time in years, the billionaire's wife is staring at someone who doesn't need her, doesn't care for her wealth or her status. She's looking at someone who in a way holds more power than she ever did, and that realization hits her harder than anything else. The room is still, the silence heavy between them. But in the midst of this silence, something shifts in the billionaire's wife. She feels the old walls she's built around herself begin to crumble. For a fleeting moment, she wonders, what if this woman, the waitress, is the one who holds the real power here? What if everything she's built her life on, the wealth, the status, the fear, is nothing more than an illusion? The room is eerily quiet, as if time itself has slowed down. The billionaire's wife is still seated, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the table. Her perfectly manicured nails are almost digging into the wood as she tries to regain her composure. But no matter how much she tries, she can't shake the feeling that something has irrevocably shifted in this space, something she can't control. She looks up at the waitress again, only to find the woman calmly going about her work. The waitress is clearing a few empty plates, her movements smooth and unhurried, as though she has all the time in the world. And maybe, in a way, she does. She doesn't need to rush, doesn't need to impress anyone. The power she carries isn't in the wealth she possesses. It's in her confidence, her self-assuredness, and her ability to stand her ground without apology. The billionaire's wife watches this woman, a mix of admiration and resentment in her chest. She's never been the type to admire anyone. After all, she's the one everyone else looks up to, the one who calls the shots. But now, with each passing moment, she feels smaller. It's as if she's looking at her own reflection in the waitress's eyes, and what she sees isn't pretty. She's spent so many years building her empire, cultivating her power, but at what cost? The waitress glances at the billionaire's wife, offering a small, almost knowing smile. It's not mocking, but it's still a little bit too confident for the billionaire's wife's liking. This woman knows exactly what she's done, and perhaps even more than that, she understands the power of silence, of letting someone sit with their own discomfort. The billionaire's wife shifts uncomfortably in her seat, unable to meet the waitress's gaze. She's never been one to show weakness, but in that moment, she feels it creeping up on her, gnawing at her. From the inside, she wants to lash out, to say something cutting, to remind the waitress of her place. But the words won't come. The silence is deafening, and with each passing second, it becomes clearer. She doesn't have the upper hand anymore. At that moment, one of the other guests at the table finally speaks up, his voice tentative as if he's not quite sure where the conversation is going to go. Well, he clears his throat. This is certainly an interesting turn of events. His attempt at humor is feeble, but it breaks the silence, and for a brief moment everyone looks around at each other, uncertain how to proceed. The waitress, unfazed, turns back to her work, though she can't help but overhear the hushed murmurs around her. There's a small part of her that feels a sense of satisfaction, but it's not about making the billionaire's wife feel small. It's about reclaiming a space that's been denied to women like her for far too long. It's about standing in her own power and forcing others to see her for who she truly is. She's not just the waitress anymore. She's the woman who doesn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. And that realization, for her, is worth more than anything this room or any wealth can offer. As the evening continues, the dynamic between the two women remains palpable, and yet there's a shift in the air. The billionaire's wife no longer holds the same dominance she once did. She started questioning everything, her power, her worth, and the life she's carefully built. The waitress, on the other hand, is exactly where she needs to be. She doesn't need to prove herself. Her silence, her actions, and the way she carries herself say everything that words never could. As the evening drags on, the billionaire's wife feels the weight of the situation slowly sinking in. She can't remember the last time she felt this out of control, this exposed. Her perfect world, one where she was the queen, the ruler of every room she entered, has been shattered in the span of a few minutes. The silence between her and the waitress has become a constant hum in her ears, an uncomfortable reminder of her own inadequacy. She looks at the other guests at the table, searching for some kind of reassurance, a glance, a word, anything to reaffirm her place at the top. But instead, she finds nothing but averted gazes, quiet whispers, and the awkward shuffling of feet. It's as though they've all suddenly realized something she's been too blinded to see. That power isn't just about money or status. It's about authenticity, strength, and knowing who you are, no matter the circumstances. The billionaire's wife shifts uncomfortably, her fingers twisting around her wine glass. She's no longer interested in the conversation around the table. She's too consumed with her own thoughts, with the way the waitress's confident gaze has stayed with her long after the woman left the room. It's a gaze that's both unnerving and inspiring, a reminder of all the things she's never been. She thinks back to her early days when she first met her husband, the CEO. At the time, she was just like every other ambitious young woman, driven, hungry for success, eager to prove herself. She thought that being married to someone powerful, someone influential, would give her everything she ever wanted. And it did, at first. She had the luxury, the respect, the admiration. But now, in this moment, she realizes just how much she's given up to maintain it all. The people who once praised her now avoid her gaze. The friends she thought she had have all faded into the background, leaving her to wonder if they ever truly cared about her, or if they were simply drawn to her power. The waitress, on the other hand, is a stark contrast. She's not playing the game, and that's what makes her so dangerous, so untouchable. She doesn't need the approval of anyone in this room. She doesn't need wealth, status, or a title. She's free in a way the billionaire's wife can only dream of. And that realization hits harder than anything else. The billionaire's wife is trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, surrounded by people who only care about her for the things she can offer. The waitress, on the other hand, has nothing but her own strength to rely on, and that's enough. As the night wears on, the billionaire's wife finds herself growing more and more introspective. She can no longer ignore the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach. She's had everything she could ever want, but what's the point if you're always afraid of losing it? What's the point if you're constantly surrounded by people who are just as eager to use you as you are to use them? She looks across the room, catching a glimpse of the waitress once more. This time there's no anger, no bitterness in her gaze, just a quiet, steady calm. And for the first time in years, the billionaire's wife feels a flicker of something she hasn't felt in a long time. Hope. She doesn't know what the future holds, but in that moment, she knows one thing for certain. She's not the same person she was when she walked into this room, and maybe, just maybe, that's a good thing. The hours slip by, but the tension in the room doesn't fade. It lingers, a heavy presence in the air, one that weighs on the billionaire's wife as she sits quietly at the table, lost in her thoughts. She can no longer focus on the trivial conversations or the polite laughter of the guests. Her mind keeps returning to the same place, the same moment, when the waitress looked her in the eye and made her feel small. She never thought it would happen to her, not in a million years. She's always been the one who controlled the room, who controlled the narrative. And yet, here she is, struggling to reclaim the power she's lost in the span of a few simple words. Her eyes drift to the corner where the waitress is now standing, talking to the kitchen staff. The woman is laughing, her presence magnetic. She's so effortlessly confident, so at ease in a space that has always made the billionaire's wife feel like a stranger. It's almost as if the waitress doesn't even notice the status differences, the wealth disparities, or the expectations placed on her. She's free in a way the billionaire's wife hasn't been in years. And that's when the billionaire's wife feels it: freedom. It's not just about money or luxury. It's not about the things she can buy or the social circles she can manipulate. It's about living authentically, without the fear of being judged or rejected. It's about standing tall, in your own skin, regardless of how much power or influence you have. For the first time in years, she starts to question everything she thought she knew. She looks at her life, at the mansion, the designer clothes, the fancy dinners, and wonders if it's all been worth it. Has it been worth sacrificing her own happiness? Has it been worth spending so much of her life trying to please people who never really saw her for who she truly was? She feels a pang of sadness at the thought of it, a deep ache in her chest. The weight of her own choices finally hits her. The years of playing a role, of pretending to be someone she wasn't, have taken their toll. She's built this empire, but at what cost? She's been chasing approval, chasing admiration, chasing something that always seemed just out of reach. And now, as she watches the waitress, she realizes that all this time she's been chasing the wrong thing. The waitress, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. She hasn't spent a day chasing anyone's approval. She's built herself up on her own terms, relying only on her own strength. The billionaire's wife watches her, admiring how effortless it seems. It's not about the paycheck or the status for the waitress. It's about finding peace in who you are and owning that peace with pride. It's about standing in the truth of your existence and not bowing down to anyone or anything. For the first time, the billionaire's wife feels like she might be capable of something different. She could choose a different path. She could let go of the fear that has held her captive for so long. She could embrace the power that comes from authenticity, from being true to herself. But it won't be easy. She knows that. The path she's on has been paved with ambition and control, and to walk away from that will take more courage than she ever thought she had. But she's beginning to realize that courage is something she's never lacked. She's been afraid of losing everything, but maybe what she's been afraid of losing isn't worth keeping anymore. It's time for a change. It's time to rewrite her story. She glances up at the waitress again, but this time there's no bitterness in her eyes. There's only respect. For the first time, she sees the waitress not as a threat, but as someone who has something she's been missing. And in that moment, The billionaire's wife understands something she's never fully grasped before. True power isn't about control. It's about freedom. The freedom to be yourself no matter what anyone else thinks. The billionaire's wife stands up from the table, the weight of the evening pressing down on her chest like a heavy cloak. Her mind is racing, but her movements are deliberate, slow. For the first time in what feels like forever, she's not thinking about the next event, the next piece of jewelry, the next piece of gossip. She's thinking about herself, who she is, what she wants, and how she's been living her life in pursuit of something that now feels empty. The other guests at the table watch her, but they don't dare say anything. They've all sensed the shift in the room, the change that's been quietly taking place. It's as if the billionaire's wife has finally seen through the facade she spent years perfecting, and now she's walking away from it. She makes her way to the exit, her heart pounding in her chest. Every step feels heavier, more significant. She knows that what she's doing is not just leaving the room, she's leaving behind the person she's been for so long. It's a painful realization, but it's one that feels necessary. She has to break free from the expectations of others, from the image she's spent so long constructing. And then she stops, right in front of the door. Her eyes find the waitress once more. The woman is standing in the corner, talking to a colleague. With an easy smile, the waitress isn't looking for approval. She's not trying to impress anyone. She's simply living, existing, and owning her space in a way the billionaire's wife never has. For a moment, their eyes meet again. This time, there's no tension. There's no competition. There's only a quiet understanding, a shared recognition of something deeper. The billionaire's wife feels her chest tighten, but this time it's not with anger or fear. It's with a sense of release, a feeling she hasn't experienced in years. "I admire you," the billionaire's wife says, her voice barely above a whisper. She knows that the words may seem insignificant, but they carry the weight of everything she's been feeling for the past few hours. The waitress doesn't respond immediately. Instead, she just smiles. A small, knowing smile that somehow makes the billionaire's wife feel seen in a way no one ever has before. "I'm not here to impress anyone," the waitress replies, her voice calm, grounded. "I'm just doing my job. But thank you." The billionaire's wife stands there for a moment longer, taking in the simplicity of the exchange. It's a moment of truth, a moment where she realizes that the power she's been seeking, the kind of power that comes with wealth and control, isn't what she needs. What she needs is to stop trying to be someone else and simply be herself. As she turns and walks out of the room, she feels lighter. The burden of trying to maintain the perfect image, the perfect life, seems to lift with each step. She doesn't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, she's okay with that. She doesn't need to have all the answers. She just needs to be true to herself. Meanwhile, the waitress watches the billionaire's wife leave, a quiet sense of satisfaction washing over her. She's not gloating, she doesn't need to. She knows that her strength, her authenticity, is what made the billionaire's wife see things differently. But she also knows that the real change is not in the moment, but in the way the billionaire's wife will move forward from here. The waitress continues her work, smiling as she moves through the room, her presence still radiating quiet confidence. She has nothing to prove. She doesn't need to explain herself. Her worth isn't determined by anyone else's opinion, and that's the power she holds. The days following the dinner were filled with uncertainty and reflection. The billionaire's wife found herself unable to escape the image of the waitress, her steady confidence, her quiet strength, her refusal to bow to the norms of high society. It was also unfamiliar to her, yet it felt like something she had been missing for years. For the first time in a long while, she couldn't stop thinking about her own life, the life she had built, and the life she had longed to escape from. She spent the next few days in solitude, away from the distractions of her usual routine. The mansion felt more like a prison than ever before, the walls closing in on her as she sat alone in her expansive living room. The lavish furniture, the sparkling chandeliers, and the priceless artwork no longer held any meaning. They were just things, possessions that had once given her a sense of purpose, but now felt empty. It wasn't the first time she had questioned her life, but it was the first time she had dared to confront the truth. She had spent so many years building her empire, climbing to the top, But what had it all been for? To impress people who didn't really care about her? To live in a world where she was constantly expected to perform? She had sacrificed her true self in exchange for a life of luxury, and now that decision seemed to weigh heavily on her heart. But the waitress, the woman who had turned her world upside down with a few simple words, was a reminder that there was another way. A way to live authentically, to be true to oneself without the need for validation from others. The waitress hadn't needed anyone's approval. She had stood in her truth, confident and proud, regardless of the world around her. And in doing so, she had unknowingly set a powerful example for the billionaire's wife. A few months have passed since that fateful evening, and the billionaire's wife is a different person now. The mansion no longer feels like a gilded cage, but a place where she can finally breathe, where she started to find her own voice again. She no longer feels the need to impress, to perform, or to chase after the hollow things that once defined her life. Instead, she's been slowly rebuilding the relationships she had neglected, connecting with those who truly see her for who she is, not for what she has. Her work with charities has become one of the most fulfilling aspects of her life. She spends her time giving back to the communities that once seemed so far removed from her own reality. And while the money and status will always be a part of her life, they no longer define her. The happiness she feels now comes from the simple joys of being authentic, of living for herself instead of others. One afternoon, as she walks through the garden of her home, she stops in her tracks. There, standing near the fountain, is the waitress. She's dressed casually, a soft smile on her face, and for a moment, the billionaire's wife is transported back to that dinner where it all began. The moment when she first saw the power in the waitress's quiet strength, the moment when she realized that true freedom comes from within. "You're here," the billionaire's wife says, her voice warm, full of gratitude. "I never thought I'd see you again." The waitress looks up, her smile widening. "I didn't expect to be here either, but when I heard you were hosting an event to benefit the local community, I knew I had to come." "I'm glad you did," the billionaire's wife responds, stepping forward. "I've been thinking about you a lot. You were right. You helped me see what I was missing, what I was running from. I've learned that it's not about having everything. It's about being true to who you are. I know it's a long journey, but I'm starting to walk it." The waitress nods, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "I'm glad to hear that. Sometimes the hardest part is realizing that the power you've been searching for is already inside you. You just have to be brave enough to let it out." The billionaire's wife smiles, her heart full. "Thank you for showing me that. I'll never forget it." The two women stand together for a moment, the quiet hum of the garden surrounding them. In this space, with no need for words, they both understand the significance of this meeting. The billionaire's wife has found a new path, and though the journey is just beginning, she feels empowered, unburdened by the weight of the image she once had to uphold. The waitress, meanwhile, continues to walk her own path, confident, grounded, and without apology. As the evening sun sets, casting a warm glow over the garden, the billionaire's wife takes a deep breath, feeling the peace settle within her. She knows that while the world around her may not have changed, she has, and that is more than enough. The waitress, standing beside her, watches the sunset too, a quiet smile on her face. She's not looking for recognition, nor does she need it. She's simply living her truth, and that's all she's ever needed.